What's good, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. I'm Kevin Smith. Today is going to be another Q&A episode from this week's Instagram Q&As. Last week we did a single topic episode, which is seemingly pretty popular already, all about how to program properly and make sure you're not doing a bunch of unfavorable for your results things for your selection prep. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and do so. But we are back to a Q&A this week. Got a bunch of questions, going to get to several of them, going to go through and just pick out the ones that are most relevant and that are the most well-structured and kind of go from there, give you guys some good answers. I just got back from in town. My wife and I went to go play pickleball. However, we did not play pickleball because it is 75 degrees and beautifully sunny out, and it's Saturday mid-morning. So needless to say, there were other people who had the same idea, and there was all the courts, there's 6 courts in town, and they were all taken, and there was a big line. So instead we just grabbed coffee and walked around, and it was super nice. But back here, gonna record this episode, get her done, and then go from there. I also have a slightly, you might not be able to tell, but I have a slightly raspy voice. Last night went out to dinner with some friends, and there was live music playing pretty much most of the dinner. So all the talking that I had to do, which is usually not that much, but I was kind of talkative last night for whatever reason. It was a yell. So my voice is a little bit lacking. I'm not used to yelling a lot. So if you can tell, then apologies, but hopefully I can make it through the episode without degrading too much, and we'll hop into it. One little update before we get into the show. Over the next few days, probably Monday or Tuesday of this next week, so either the day after this comes out or 2 days after this comes out, I am going to be launching my selection prep, recovery, and nutrition guide ebook. It is, as of now, and it's pretty much finalized. I just have to go through it one more time. It is 67 pages long in ebook format, and that will be available for cheaper than what I intend to sell it eventually. It will be on sale when it first comes out. So give me a follow on Instagram, Terminator_training. That will be where I advertise for it most. And or also I will send a email out to my email list. So you guys will be notified when that is ready. But it's basically a pretty comprehensive guide to the main things you need to focus on for optimal performance, optimal recovery, and optimal fueling and nutrition for selection. All those things are kind of intertwined. If you feel well, you're going to recover better. You're going to perform better. If you sleep better, you're going to perform better. Unfortunately, it's not full of a bunch of recovery gimmicks like wearing Normatec pants or spending hours a day doing mobility or anything like that. It is mainly focused on the things that actually work the most and get you 98% of the way there, and not the other 2% that a lot of recovery guides and recovery content focuses on. So if you are interested in that, if you are preparing for any soft selection, it's not SFAS specific. It would apply to really anyone trying to maximize their performance for any selection or really any training endeavor. All that stuff's pretty universal. There are some specific nuanced things about soft selection that need a little bit more explanation, but it applies to really everyone. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. It should be out in the next few days, and I will definitely keep you guys posted. But aside from that, let's hop into today's questions. We're going to start with the first question I got, which is actually a really good question. And I usually emphasize when I do Q&As to make them as high effort as possible. I do understand that there's not a lot of space. There's not a lot of characters allowed for these questions. So in the future, I'm considering doing the anonymous ones where you can ask longer questions. The only reason I'm hesitant to do that is because some people take that too far, and they'll ask me, I'll get DMs that have 4 to 5 full character limit DM Instagram characters, long questions. And unfortunately, there's only 24 hours in the day. I have a business to run, and I try to limit my time on social media. And although I used to answer almost every DM because I had the time for it and I didn't have a lot of clients and I didn't have a lot of other things going on, I just simply don't have the time for that anymore, or the bandwidth, unfortunately. So I apologize if you sent me a really long DM and I haven't gotten back to you, but hopefully you can understand the reason why. But I am considering allowing for a little bit longer of questions in some way, shape, or form. I might have like an email link that you guys can use to do a little bit longer questions. Maybe like every 3 episodes or so, I'll do an episode that has just a few questions, but they're more nuanced and more detailed. And I'll just kind of go deeper on each one instead of going through several questions. So I get it. Not a lot of space to ask your Instagram Q&A questions. However, some of them are significantly higher effort than other ones. And I'm happy to put a lot of effort into the answers in those ones. And some of them are just like, a lot of them don't even have question marks at the end. So if you want your question answered, put some effort into it, put some thought into it, because I put a lot of effort into answering them and trying to help you guys out. But if I clearly can tell that someone just wrote down some random words and just didn't put any context, didn't put really much thought into it, then I'm not going to put much thought into that question, unfortunately. So just food for thought in the future. But first question, is walking extra as a means of strengthening lower limbs and injury prevention a good idea for selection? So although walking has tons and tons and tons of benefits, and I would never suggest not walking to pretty much anyone. In fact, I would suggest most people walk more. For this exact context, to strengthen your lower limbs for selection, you're not going to really get a lot of bang for your buck out of walking a ton. This is also, we're assuming, walking in addition to all of the running and the rucking that you're going to be doing. Again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't walk. That doesn't mean you can't walk. That doesn't mean you can't benefit from walking. But how much is it going to actually strengthen your tendons and your soft tissue on top of the work you're already doing in preparation for selection? Most likely not much. I will say, though, one thing that I do recommend to people, if they are not regular runners and they're looking to build a running base. So say maybe you're going to selection like a year from now or longer, and you want to build a running base before you get into your selection specific training, which I would do. That is a good idea to do. If you're someone who walks a lot more than, say the average person, you're going to have a most likely and better time building your base. And you're probably, if you do it right, you're less likely to hurt yourself because you're just used to putting a lot of time on your feet. So that would be a really good idea. If you're taking 15, 18,000 steps per day before you start building your running base, or in combination with building your running base, you're most likely going to be a lot better off than if you're taking what the average American takes, which is like 2,700 steps per day. So that would be something to consider. But while you, again, should walk in combination with your selection prep, it's just really good for mental health, really good for physical health, being outside, being in nature, all very beneficial things. Is it going to make you a lot more durable and a lot more injury proof? Most likely not. But again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just, I don't think I would consider it a great way to improve your durability and make you less injury prone. So very good question. And something to consider, something to try. But at the same time, I wouldn't expect to just become bulletproof and extremely injury resistant from that alone. But your other training, your strength training, your rucking and your running mileage and your lower leg maintenance, like tib raises, calf raises, maybe some backward sled drags, some pogo hops, some other plyometric stuff that just get your body used to that impact, are all really good things. So I would focus mostly on those, but you absolutely can walk a little bit too. Next question, why hasn't my body adjusted to humidity? Been 3 to 4 weeks and the heart rate is still high during runs. Yeah, so although the more you expose yourself and the more you acclimate to heat and humidity, I've talked about this before, but the most important factor you're looking for to consider at heat training is the dew point. If the dew point is really high, 70 degrees is pretty damn uncomfortable. 75 degrees is like dangerously high. So it doesn't necessarily even need to be that hot temperature wise, but if the dew point's like 76, so say it's, for example, a morning in North Carolina in July, usually the temperature is like 80 degrees, but the humidity is so high and the dew point is very high. The dew point's usually probably in the mid 70s. That would still be considered heat training. So unfortunately in North Carolina, if you were trying to avoid training in the heat, it's really hard to do unless you do some training indoors. But anyway, even though you will acclimate to it and you'll get better at it, it's still not going to, just because you're doing it regularly doesn't mean you're going to perform just as well as you would perform in cooler weather. It's still a more stressful environment for your body, even when you are acclimated. Almost every single all-time world record in any endurance event longer than like 5K has been done in weather under 50 degrees. So it's impossible for the dew point to be higher than the temperature. So needless to say, cooler weather is always going to be better for performance. The same person with the same level of fitness is going to perform better in a run of basically any distance that's longer than, 15 minutes long, or a duration run that's longer than 15-ish minutes long, maybe even shorter. It shouldn't affect you that much for like a really short sprint or something like that. But anything that is longer where your core temperature really rises, a runner of the same level of fitness in the same conditions other than the temperature is going to be considerably faster in 50 degrees than 80 degrees or 90 degrees or 95 degrees with a super high dew point. So your heart rate's going to be higher. Your RPE is going to be higher at the same rate basis. Your heart rate, in order to keep it where you want to keep it, if you want to keep it in a certain zone, you're going to have to go slower than you normally do. Or you can just accept the fact that by going faster, you're not necessarily, your heart rate's not higher because you're going harder. It's just higher because it's also trying to keep your body cool. It's a cardiovascular stress. Your body's trying to pump blood to the peripheries so you can sweat and actually cool yourself off. So that's just going to happen. The more often you do it, the better you're going to get, but expect a higher heart rate, expect a higher RPE, and expect yourself to not put up the times that you're otherwise capable of in cooler weather. That's just kind of the way it is. If you guys want to read an article all about heat training, I have recently put one on Substack. I will link to it in the show notes and you guys can check that out. But just something to expect. The more often you do it, the better you're going to be. But at the same time, it's still not ideal for maximum performance. You may not be hitting PRs in the heat, even if it doesn't necessarily mean you're less fit. It just means the weather is not favorable for you to perform at a maximum optimal level. Next question, recommended workout programs for someone that has a tight work schedule. Yeah, I have a program exactly for this. It is called the Time Crunch program. It is 6 days a week of training. So typically I'll just kind of make some recommendations and then kind of tell you about the program. But usually if you have a tight schedule, it can be really easy to fall off the wagon because a lot of people will do they'll hit 2 days a week and they'll hit longer workouts or something like that, maybe 3 days a week. But then they maybe have a week that they're super busy and they don't get to them. And then it's really easy to fall into the habit of missing your workouts. So what I typically recommend for this type of person is to do more frequent workouts almost every day, but shorter. So you're still getting similar volume to what you would get if you were doing like 2 to 3 full body workouts per week, but you're just spreading it over 6 days instead. So that is what I would recommend. It's just easier to stick to the habit and it's something that you can put into your day every single day. And if it takes 20 to 30 minutes, then usually, most likely you can fit it in somehow. So that's what I usually recommend for people on tighter schedules. My Time Crunch program is just that. Each workout the base workout is about 20 minutes long. It also has, for days that you have a little bit more time, it has some additional volume you can add if you'd like. That would probably take you 30, 35 minutes. And it is not a program I talk about all that much, but it is a program that a lot of busy parents have used and have really liked and said good things about. The problem with most really short workout programs that are, each workout's really short, they try to fit as much possible work in as they can in an effort to make the person feel tired and accomplished. And if you listen to the last episode, if your goal is to improve, then you actually have to do things that align with the basic fundamentals of strength and conditioning and programming. You can't just try and fit as much things in as you possibly can. If your goal is to just feel tired and smoked all the time and just get a really good workout in, quote unquote, then you definitely should just try and fit as much as you possibly can. Just do burpees for 20 straight minutes if you want, and burpee pull-ups or something like that. But you're not going to get great results from that. So the programming principles still apply. You just have to really trim the fat. You have to find the most bang for your buck lifts, which are usually compound lifts, and potentially do 2 to 3 exercises, maybe even one exercise. Maybe if you are really short on time and you have 15 minutes a day to train, you could pick one exercise to do per day. Say maybe Monday is squat, Tuesday is a row, or maybe a superset row and a press, Wednesday deadlift, and then repeat that. Maybe you do a front squat this time, you do a slightly different press and pull the next time, and then you do a deadlift variation the next time. Even though that doesn't sound like super duper optimal, and it's not, it is way better than nothing. So I would consider at least doing something. Another thing that works really well for some people, just depending on what your gym access looks like. If you're working from home, this works really well if you have a home gym or any equipment at home. is to break your workout into multiple segments. So maybe you do like a main lift in the morning for 15 minutes, and then at noon you come back and you do a couple accessories, and then maybe in the evening for 20 minutes or whatever, you do some cardio or something like that. That would work really well as well. Or you can literally just do, some people, this actually works really well. This is a technique that a lot of high level weightlifters use, Olympic lifters. They'll do morning skill work, then they'll do midday intense stuff, and then they'll do evening accessories or something like that. Or they'll just pick one lift all day long and just do a few sets in the morning, a few sets midday, and then maybe a few sets in the evening, or maybe some accessories or mobility or something in the evening. So it really just depends on what exactly your schedule looks like, what your gym access looks like. My program, the Time Crunch program, is garage gym friendly. If you have a decent access to the basic garage gym stuff, barbell, rack, bench, dumbbells, stuff like that. But that would be what I suggest doing, and kind of going from there. And even though it's not perfect, it is still way better than nothing. Even if you get 10 minutes in every single day, or even if you get 30 minutes in twice a week, you are still way better off doing that than nothing. A lot of people have this all or nothing mentality where if they can't get a perfect week of workouts in, they just don't do it. And that is not a good mentality to have. It's hard to break, but it is not helpful. Doing something is always better than nothing. Next question, how to get faster at rucking? I'm strong, but not fast, specifically for longer rucks. Yeah, so really you get faster at rucking by training just like you want to get faster at anything else. Rucking is a little bit different. Say, for example, running, you do a bunch of speed work to get faster. You build a really good base, and then you do a bunch of speed work. However, rucking is a little different. You don't necessarily have to do speed work. If you really struggle with ruck speed, you can do certain things like fartleks or repeats. I usually don't recommend those to most people, but that's not to say that they don't work for anyone. First, you want to build a really good running base. And since you're already strong, that's good. If you have a good solid base of gym strength, full body gym strength, that's also a good thing. But following that, you want to start transitioning into rucking, but not necessarily ruck running, and not necessarily like jumping into rucking as fast as you can. You want to build a really good base of ruck walking. And a lot of people kind of make the mistake when they aren't ruck running, they're just walking. They just kind of go at a leisurely pace. They don't really care about trying to walk faster. And I think that's a mistake. If you're really good at running and you're really strong and you are really good at ruck walking, once you start to switch over to a little bit of speed rucking, a little bit of faster rucking, you're going to be much better off than if you don't really take that ruck walking portion of it seriously, or if you try to do it without building a good base of strength, or if you try to do it without building that good running base. So since you're already strong, step one is to build a really good running base. Step two is to ruck a lot, work on speed. Don't necessarily start ruck running. I typically don't recommend ruck running unless you are training for a selection or something that involves ruck speed. And specifically, probably not until you're about 3 months out. But once you have been doing that for a while and you feel pretty good, your body is holding up, you're not feeling super banged up, you're feeling well recovered, then you can start doing some faster rucking. What I typically do is have guys on their long rucks that I usually start with just walking. I'll have them run a portion of it. For example, someone doing a 90-minute ruck, 4 out of every 10 minutes on that ruck. After the first 10 minutes and before the last 10 minutes, those are like warm up, cool down. I'll have them do trot or run. And usually I emphasize, try not to spend too much time running downhill with a ruck on, because it's very, very stressful on the joints. You should do a little bit if you're training for selection, but it should be used sparingly. You should absolutely do it when you're getting tested on rucking, because it's a great way to make up time. But training is different than testing. And if you're spending a lot of time ruck running downhill in training, you're going to beat yourself up a lot more. So I typically recommend mostly running on flats and slight uphills. Running steep uphills can be done if you're a really good rucker, but it is very fatiguing. It's way less stressful on the joints, but it is super fatiguing and it can kind of smoke you. But that is how I'd kind of introduce it. And then you can start doing things like, first out of a 90-minute ruck again, first 45 minutes walk, last 45 minutes run as you see fit, as you can. Or you can cut it into certain, I usually like to use terrain, but you can also use 500 paces walk, 500 paces run, 200 paces walk, 200 paces run, something like that. If that doesn't work and you're still kind of slow and you want to get faster, you can start doing some sort of repeats. You can do mile repeats, 2-mile repeats, 5K repeats. You can do fartlek runs or fartlek rucks where you go like pretty slow for a little while, faster for a little while, slower for a little while. But usually by doing what I said first, building that good base of running, full body strength, and ruck walking, usually once you transition over to ruck running, you're going to be fast enough. You don't have to be crazy fast. I'm assuming this person is asking because they want to go to selection at some point. If you can ruck for about 2 hours, maybe 3, and maintain about a 12-minute pace, you're going to be fast enough. The faster you are, the better. But at the same time, that is fast enough. So you don't have to get to where you're running 8-minute miles, although some guys do. It's not necessary. And most people just don't have the genetic makeup to get there, but you definitely can get faster if you just put the work in and continue to stay consistent. Next question, how much time off is appropriate after attending selection? This depends on the person, and it depends on how much selection absolutely destroyed you. But I would probably take at least a few days off completely, where you just chill, eat, sleep, relax. Hopefully you made it. You get to be happy with yourself for a little while. But you don't want to take too much time off. Usually complete inactivity is not a good idea, generally speaking. For a few days, it's totally fine. But if you're doing that for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's going to be even more difficult to get back into it. So I would start with some really light workouts after a few days. Assuming you're not like completely screwed up and really injured, you can still train with your injured. You can train around injuries, by the way, but clear it with your doctor, clear it with your PT before you start getting into it. But after a few days, I would start getting on some walks at least, maybe do some non-impact cardio just to get your heart rate up a little bit, get some biking in, rowing, Stairmaster, something like that. Stairmaster's low impact cardio, but I would also probably do some really light lifting, super light. Don't expect to be anywhere near as strong as you were before you went, but you want to start getting back into your basic ranges of motion, your squats, your hinging, your pressing, your pulling. I personally, after both selections I went to, I was back in the gym after about 5 days for SMU selection, 5 days after the very last event, which most of you guys probably know what that is. I was back in the gym and I was definitely taking it easy. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I probably took at least 2 or 3 weeks before I started running again. And I don't think I rucked for a long time after that, just because you ruck so much there. I was just kind of sick of rucking, but definitely took it easy. I was much weaker than I was before I went. And you just kind of got to take it slow and not try and hit PRs and not try and just smash yourself when you get back into it. But some people will take way too long off because they're, tired or fatigued or under-recovered or injured. And I think that's a big mistake. Even if you are injured, say you injured your leg or your foot or your knee or something like that, guess what? You can train your upper body. I promise. There are ways to train around almost every single injury, and being injured is not an excuse to not train in most cases. Of course, if you have like a spinal injury or something like that, that's one thing. But if you have runner's knee or shin splints or a stress fracture in your leg, and that's your excuse not to train at all, then I would highly encourage you to start thinking outside the box a little bit. That's not even thinking that far outside the box either. Like, hey, I have a stress fracture in my shin. What can I do? Pretty much everything other than running and rucking and maybe certain leg exercises. So definitely err on the side of getting back into it sooner than later, but at the same time, don't push yourself too hard and be reasonable with it and really work your way back into it. Your strength and your endurance should come back pretty quick. Your endurance should be still pretty solid anyway, even though you're in a massively depleted state when you finish selection. You're doing endurance the entire time, so it shouldn't really go away. One thing you probably don't want to do too quickly is high impact stuff. But that does also depend on the person. If you're an ultra runner or if you ran a ton of volume going in and you feel pretty good after selection, you could probably get back into running a little bit sooner. But just take it easy, be smart about it, and be patient with it. Your strength will come back. It'll just take a little while. Next question, are bicep and tricep exercises important for selection prep? How should they be prepped, or how should they be implemented, we'll call it? Yeah, so are they important? Not necessarily. I wouldn't emphasize them. I wouldn't focus on them. Like, I'm talking bicep and tricep isolation movements. So tricep extensions, push downs, curls, skull crushers, different types of curl variations. How often should you do them? Probably not that often, but are they useless? No. Having a really good, solid foundation of full body strength is important, and your arms are part of your body. So to say that no one should ever do any arm exercises as they prepare for selection is very short-sighted, very dogmatic. But if you're doing like a full arm day or if you're training your arms with just as much volume as like push muscles and pull muscles and stuff like that, that's definitely excessive. So depending on your limb length and your anthropometry, is just kind of like the way your body is structured. Some people get great stimulus for their biceps and triceps doing pull exercises and push exercises. A lot of people have really jacked arms just from doing rows, pull downs, bench presses, dumbbell presses, and lifts like that, compound lifts that are not necessarily arm exercises, but they still involve the arms. Not everyone is like that. If I never did any arm isolation movements, my arms would still be very skinny, and they are pretty skinny anyway. So I need to personally, in order for my arms to stay on par with the rest of my body, or at least be close, I need to train them in isolation. I don't do it that much. I usually probably hit 4 to 8 biceps exercises, isolation movements per week, and I probably hit 6 to 10 tricep exercises in isolation per week. You don't necessarily need to train your arms with as much volume as your push muscles and your pull muscles, your chest, your back, your shoulders, etc., because they get so much indirect volume from doing those exercises anyway. A lot of people make that mistake, and they do, they hear that 12 to 20 sets per week per muscle group is the range of volume that is favorable for gains. We won't get into this, but that could be appropriate. It's not appropriate for everyone. But they also train their biceps and their triceps with 12 to 20 sets each per week. And that is usually too much because you're already getting indirect stimulus from pushing and pulling. So I personally would maybe add some curls and some tricep push downs. Definitely do some lateral raises. Your lateral delts don't get hit with almost any compound lift enough for them to grow. And having balanced muscles is functional. So even though a lot of people say bicep curls and tricep extensions and calf raises and lateral raises are not functional, what's even less functional is having imbalances. And if you never do any isolation movements for any of those muscles that I just mentioned, if you are genetically able to get enough stimulus from the compound lifts, that's fine, but not everyone is. And therefore, if you're not, then you'll have certain imbalances. Some muscles in your body will be significantly stronger and way more developed than other ones. And although imbalances are, kind of nuanced, and everyone's going to have somewhat of an imbalance side to side, upper body to lower body, etc., the more drastic your imbalances are, the more problematic it can be for injury and overall performance. So I wouldn't prioritize your arms, but I also wouldn't say that nobody should ever do any arm exercises for selection prep as part of their selection prep. Doing 4 to 6 sets of curls and 4 to 6 sets of a tricep-based exercise per week is not going to be fatiguing. It's not going to be all that fatiguing. It's not going to detract from your other training, so long as you're, using good form and you're not using a bunch of momentum, doing a bunch of drop sets and stuff like that. So if you have the time for it and you think you need stronger arms, which having strong arms is pretty important, then I absolutely would not completely rule it out, and you absolutely can do so. If you're doing a full arm day, doing Armageddon every Friday to get a full weekend pump before you go to the bars, then you are probably not prioritizing the right things, but a little bit of arm training is totally fine. Next question, how do you minimize cramping when hydration and nutrition may not be great at selection? A lot of people have a misconception that cramping is always a result of poor hydration or insufficient hydration, insufficient water, insufficient electrolytes, maybe insufficient nutrition. And while that absolutely can play a role in cramping, it is not the only thing that potentially causes cramping. Cramps are so complicated that even people who spend their entire lives studying the causes of cramps still don't know for sure what causes every single cramp. They don't know all of the mechanisms at play that potentially result in someone getting a cramp. Generally speaking, in my experience, if you get a cramp in a working muscle, it's usually, so say for example, you are rucking and you're on mile 10 of a 12 miler and it's really hot and humid, and your quads start to cramp or your hamstrings start to cramp. Usually both happen. At least for me, every time I've cramped, my hamstring locks up and then I try to straighten my leg out in order to stretch it to get the cramp out. And then usually my quad locks up and it's just a bad day. Usually that is a lack of fitness, lack of sufficient conditioning thing. So you just aren't used to that level of intensity yet. If it's really, really hot out, that may be a factor as well, but it may not be your hydration, especially if you are going into each event well hydrated and you are maintaining your hydration throughout the entire time. A lot of people, the first thing they do is they start slamming a bunch more hydration. They start slamming a bunch more water. Your body can only handle so much fluids and electrolytes per hour when you are training, when you are running, when you're rucking, whatever it may be. So usually slamming more water once a cramp already happens, best case scenario, it's not going to help at all. It's completely pointless. Worst case scenario, especially if you're slamming plain water, it is likely going to make your cramps worse because it's going to kind of flush the electrolytes out of your system. And that's not what you want at all. So usually when you get cramps, the best method is to try and invent or adjust your gait in a way that the cramps don't bother you as much. For me personally, and for a lot of people, the worst part, the thing that induces cramps the most is when you're going from working hard and moving, we'll say rucking, for example, to stopping. Anytime I've ever had to stop on like a ruck and get like my ruck weighed or stop and refill waters or whatever on a long ruck time trial, that's usually when my cramps set in. It's not usually when I'm going. So if you can, at least plan for that and prioritize it. I can't remember at SFAS whether they stop you halfway to weigh your ruck or not. But if they do, definitely be mindful of it and be like, okay, I might get a cramp here. Usually once you start going again, you might have to change your gait a little bit for a little while. Usually you're going to be okay. So as for the nutrition and hydration, you're going to get plenty of water. You're going to get plenty of ORS. The ORSs don't taste very good. Basically, ORS is oral rehydration salt, and it tastes pretty much like seawater. And a lot of people don't drink it because it doesn't taste good, but that is a huge mistake. You definitely are going to be losing a shit ton, especially if you go to selection in the fall, summer, winter. They don't have selection in June, July, but there's a class going on right now and it's pretty hot here. And there's a class that occurs in August. That is a pretty brutal class. I believe it's the lowest selection rate class that there is on average, just because most likely because of the heat. But absolutely drink the ORS that they give you, even if it doesn't taste good. So what you can do is mix it with some of the beverage powders from the MREs, and it tastes a little bit better that way. But you definitely want to maintain your hydration. However, you still might cramp. And if you have a game plan and you also have the knowledge of when I start cramping, I shouldn't just start slamming a bunch of water in order to get rid of it, because it's probably not going to work, then you're going to be set up for more success. Another thing that potentially could be causing your cramping is that you're going a lot harder. Your adrenaline's higher. You're probably less recovered, more fatigued going into each subsequent event after like day one. And you're trying to get your best times in your runs and your rucks. Usually cramping is more of an issue, rucking, but not always. Sometimes people cramp running as well. What may be causing the cramp is just that you're kind of outrunning your headlights a little bit, which is not like necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, I've done it before too. And if you want to get a really good time, you might have to go harder than you've ever gone in training. And you might be a lot more fatigued and already beat down going into these sessions, into these rucks, than you have been in training. So it's just something to kind of expect. Some people are more prone to cramping than other people, but as long as you maintain your hydration in a reasonable manner, if your urine is approximately straw colored, you don't want your urine to look just like the water you're drinking. You also don't want it to look like apple juice or neon yellow. That's not good either. Somewhere in between there is a perfect hydration spot. You're not always going to be perfectly hydrated at selection. After you finish a 12 miler, you're going to be dehydrated because, like I said, your body can only process a certain amount of water and electrolytes per hour. Usually, depending on the person, 24 to 32 ounces of water with 700 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour is usually a good starting point to be. I'm not exactly sure how much sodium is in one ORS, but that might be something to look up before you go, just so you know how much you're putting in your canteens. And one quart canteen should be, I believe a quart is 32 ounces. So if you're slamming 12 1-quart canteens on a 12-mile ruck, you're probably diluting the electrolytes in your bloodstream throughout, and you're probably doing yourself much more of a disservice than actually helping yourself. But if you're taking them in about one quart per hour and you go into the event well hydrated, then you are probably going to be sufficiently hydrated throughout the entire time, and doing more is not necessarily going to help you. So kind of jumped around there, but cramps are not always because of poor hydration. They're not always because of poor nutrition. They sometimes can be, but they also sometimes can be just because you are really smoked and you're going faster than what you are capable of. And that's fine as long as you have a game plan and you don't freak out and you kind of work through it. It can be worked through. Next question. How did you find Ranger School compared to SUT/tac skills? Yeah. So SUT, I think they call it tac skills now, but I think it's pretty similar other than the fact that it used to be held all of it out at Camp McCall. So I went out to Camp McCall for 8 straight weeks and we did it out there. We had a bunch of FTXs and did our graded events. I found Ranger School tactically and, getting the job done, like my graded events was a lot easier because I had already gone through SUT. I went through SUT as a X-ray. So I had 0 experience in the Army. I had 0 experience with tactics. I had 0 experience with patrols, leading guys, all that kind of stuff. So that was definitely more difficult for me to perform well enough to get a passing grade. I still did, but it definitely took a lot of extra work. I had a lot of guys in my platoon. I was lucky enough to have a lot of guys in my squad actually that were Ranger tabbed. So they taught me most of the things that I knew because my instructor didn't really teach us much. So that part of it was more difficult, and it probably will be for most 18 X-rays, especially if you go to Ranger School afterwards, having already done SUT, the entire Q course, spent time in group and stuff like that. That's what I did. So that is the harder part, but SUT is not quite as miserable, or at least it wasn't for me, because the FTXs were not quite as long. They were, I think, 3 to 4 days long or so. I can't remember how long the FTXs are in Darby, but they're about that, maybe a little shorter. And then the FTXs in Mountain School or in Mountain Phase are, the first one's 5 days. Then you come back for like a day of refit. And then the second one's 5 days. So 10 total days. And then in Florida Phase, it's 10 straight days out in the field. So you don't get any refit halfway through. So that part kind of sucks. Additionally, Ranger School, you don't get nearly as much food. You also don't get caffeine other than the caffeine that's in coffee, which they'll tell you not to use, but I would use that anyway. You don't get to use nicotine or tobacco, and those things are very comforting when you're out in the field. I definitely dipped way too much when I was in SUT, and I probably had way too much caffeine, but such is life. I mean, you're miserable the entire time. I went through SUT in the summer. I went through Ranger School in the winter. Both of those suck for different reasons. Being under a ruck in the summertime is very not fun, but also being in mountains in November is also not enjoyable because you're cold all the time. Because by the time you get to mountains, you're already really smoked. You're already very calorie depleted. You're already very sleep deprived. So even if it's 40 degrees out, it feels like it's 15 degrees out. You feel like you're about to die of hypothermia. So I would say Ranger School, a little bit easier tactically, a significant amount easier tactically if you've already gone through SUT, probably a little bit easier if you haven't. But everything else about Ranger School is way worse, especially when you're coming from group and you've had it pretty good for a little while and you decide to go suck for a little while at Ranger School. It's definitely a little bit miserable and it's definitely sucky to go in the wintertime. So pros and cons to both, but at the same time, both doable. And you just got to put your head down and hopefully your men are motivated enough to help you out and kind of go from there. Next question. Should I run Jacked Gazelle on repeat until SF Prep? I'm 18 to 24 months out from SFAS. Jacked Gazelle, for those who are not aware, is my hybrid program. The main purposes of it are building strength, mainly in the power lifts, and building some muscle and improving your endurance. Mostly running, but you can choose whatever cardio you want. Most people use it for running. They do a little bit of rucking as well. And oftentimes, people will follow Jacked Gazelle before they start my SFAS program. And I think that's a pretty sound way to do it. That being said, there's a few reasons why I wouldn't recommend running it on repeat for that long. You could probably run it twice in a row, but I wouldn't recommend running it for more than that. And here's why. One is because it's a very barbell dominant move program, which a lot of people would say you should just use the barbell nonstop forever. I have not found that to be very favorable for a lot of people. The barbell is a great tool and you can get really strong with a barbell. You can get really strong doing squats, bench, deadlift, overhead press, etc. But at the same time, it is a very good idea to switch the barbell out from time to time and use specialty bars, use dumbbells, use machines, use your body weight, etc. Because the barbell keeps you in a fixed position, your hands on the bar, pretty much every lift other than hinging. The barbell will keep you in a fixed position and the joints involved in the movement can become a little bit overworked and stressed out. So if you do bench press just forever, a lot of people would not handle that very well. Their shoulders would start talking to them. Their elbows might start talking to them eventually. And it would be a better idea for them to find an alternative to the straight barbell bench press. Squats, same thing. Squats are kind of a funny one. They can bother people's knees. They can bother people's hips, of course, but also they can bother people's upper body, especially if you're a low bar squatter. You don't have great external rotation, shoulder mobility, upper back mobility. The position you hold the bar on your back can be a little bit rough on the shoulders. So that would be a smart one to switch out once in a while. Do a front squat, do a safety bar squat, do a machine squat, whatever it may be. The overhead press is usually even more problematic for the shoulders than bench press for a lot of people to do all the time, because that one requires a lot of mobility. It also requires lack of ego, and not a lot of people have lack of ego. So they push that exercise too hard, and it's very stressful on not just the shoulders, but people have messed up their necks. People have messed up their lower back even because they arch too much. And that would be a smart lift to switch out from time to time as well. There are no barbell overhead presses in Jacked Gazelle for pretty much that exact reason. It doesn't work well for more people than it does work well for, in my experience. You're not going to see that a lot of different places. Not a lot of people are going to talk about that, but it is just the case. Overhead pressing is great, but not necessarily great for everybody to do with a barbell, especially just like a classic standing overhead press. Really good for beginners, really good to learn the overhead press, really good for anyone who needs to do that as part of their competition, really good for people with excellent mobility, but most people don't have excellent mobility, and therefore they mess themselves up eventually doing too many overhead presses. Barbell rows are fine, but at the same time, you absolutely can do a chest supported row. You can do dumbbell rows. You can do machine rows. You can do pull downs. Usually a good idea. It has your elbows are in this fixed position, and it can be a little bit problematic on the elbows. Also, it involves, which is not a good thing or a bad thing, but it involves a lot of stabilization. You're bending over, you're using your spinal erectors mostly and your glutes a little bit to stabilize the lift. And a lot of people use a lot of momentum, and their egos are very ever present on that movement as well. So generally speaking, all that being said, it's a good idea to switch out the barbell from time to time. That is one main reason I would not necessarily recommend running Jacked Gazelle back to back to back to back for a year and a half to 2 years. Another reason is because it doesn't cover all of the fitness disciplines that are important for long-term fitness and well-rounded fitness. It's pretty much literally lift weights to get strong and jacked and run or ruck, whatever cardio you're doing. There's no agility, there's no speed, there's no jumping, there's no plyometrics or anything like that, very little power. So it's missing those components. Doing that for 4 months at a time, maybe 8 months at a time is fine. Doing Jacked Gazelle, if you are pretty knowledgeable about making some adjustments and adding certain things in, totally fine. But if you just follow it to a T, back to back to back, you're probably going to miss out on a lot. You're going to miss out on a lot of beneficial fitness adaptations. And finally, there is very little to no there's very little to no calisthenic body weight calisthenics. There are definitely weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, but you are missing out a little bit on the push-up aspect. You're missing out on some body weight pull-ups. You're going to do a lot of weighted pull-ups, and pull-ups are another exercise that can smash people's shoulders up a little bit if they do them too much, or if they go too heavy, or if they do them too often, or if they do them with a lot of ego. So for those main reasons, that is why I would take a few months off at a time from Jacked Gazelle. Even people who are even professional powerlifters who literally use the barbell, their entire sport involves just the barbell. It's barbell bench, barbell squat, barbell deadlift. Lift as much as you possibly can, total as high as you can. If you have a really high total, you're going to win. Professional powerlifters even take time off in the off season from even touching a barbell. They might use it for a deadlift accessory like a RDL or a stiff-legged deadlift. Maybe they keep that in. But for the most part, they switch out barbell benching. They switch out barbell squatting. They use a safety bar, or they use hack squat, machine, whatever it may be, for a little while to build some muscle, allow their joints to kind of start coming back to life and feeling solid. And you can also get, for a lot of people, better hypertrophy from venturing away from the barbell. So I personally would consider either following Jacked Gazelle once, then maybe following a more well-rounded program, maybe hopping on T850. The main differences between T850, which is my training team on TrainHeroic, and Jacked Gazelle are pretty much everything I just talked about. So less barbell movement. There still is some barbell work, but way less focused on getting as good at the big three, the power lifts, as possible, like Jacked Gazelle is. There is more jumping. There's usually every phase has at least one Metcon in it. So you get to do some like work capacity work. And the program also implements a lot more cables and machines and some body weight exercises and things like that. So it's more well-rounded. And the good thing about T850 is you can hop on and then you can hop off, and then you can hop on and you can hop off. Every 6 weeks, I start a new phase with it, and I usually advertise it on my Instagram. But that you can really hop on anytime you want. You're just going to be a little. It won't be like you're starting. If you don't start at the first part of the block, the first week of the block, you're kind of going to be jumping into the middle of a block. Which the way I program, I don't program guys weights or percentages or anything like that. In Jacked Gazelle, there are percentage ranges because it's mainly a strength program, but T850 is not like get strong as possible in the power lifts. Even though the power lifts are sometimes involved in the phases, you'll never see percentages. You'll see RPEs, RIRs, and things like that because it's just programming for the masses. That is a better way to do it. So all that to say, I wouldn't recommend following it for that long. I would recommend doing something more well-rounded here and there. And then probably when you're 7 months or so out from selection, I would hop on Jacked Gazelle, or you could continue on T850. Either one will get you a really good base going into a selection prep. And then you could hop onto an SFAS prep program for the last 3 months or so. And you're going to be set up for success. Your joints are going to feel a lot better. You're probably going to be just as strong, if not stronger. Because even though Jacked Gazelle is mainly focused on strength, like I said, taking time off and not using the barbell for a little while is usually a better idea for long-term strength gains because you're just going to feel better. You're not going to be as banged up. You're going to recover better. You're not going to have to take any hiatuses because your joints are bothering you. And that would be my suggestion in approaching that. Next question. Do you have any advice in regards to stress management? Yeah, absolutely. Lots of different things in this world right now are pretty much designed to not help our stress. We have these little 6-inch by 3-inch boxes. I don't know the dimensions of a phone, but typically the more time you spend on that, especially if you're doing it without really good intentions going in, the worse your stress is usually going to be. So if you go on to social media all the time, you scroll, or if you read news all the time, and you're not really going on with like, I want to learn this, or I want to get this out of this time I use my phone, usually you're just going to end up feeling worse. You're going to get all these dopamine hits, and then the come down for that is a bunch of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. You're not going to feel great. So definitely set rules around your phone. For me, I am currently on, other than 1 day a week, Wednesday, when I do my Q&As, I spend 30 minutes total on Instagram. I have that limit. I usually spend 15 minutes mid-morning, 15 minutes mid-afternoon, and that's it. That's the only time I spend on there because I'm way more productive when I do that. I can focus on things better. I'm more determined to actually do things because I'm not wasting all my dopamine on mindlessly scrolling. But B, it's just like way less time, and I have like more stuff that I can do. And my mental health is 10 times better when I do that. And I set those rules and I stick to them. It's a pretty hard habit to start to get into. I started with like 90 minutes, then I worked my way down to 60, and right now I'm on 30. It may not always be like that, but right now it is. Even though I run my business off pretty much most of it off Instagram, I still have to limit myself because it just sucks the energy out of me. So phone rules and phone restrictions will absolutely go a long way in managing your stress. Getting really good sleep. I think it was episode 105. I talked about how sleep and stress are so closely intertwined. Pretty much when you don't sleep well, your cortisol levels are higher. Cortisol is a hormone that is important, but when it's out of balance, it's going to make you feel more stressed, and it's going to give you more symptoms of stress. So if you're not sleeping well, that would probably be the lowest hanging fruit, that and your phone. Start going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, 7 days a week, if at all possible. I understand people have social events and things like that, but if you have the opportunity to either spend a bunch of time watching Instagram or watching Netflix or scrolling Instagram or whatever people do at nighttime, that is not really all that beneficial to their mental health. I would highly suggest getting to bed and waking up at the same time. That's probably the biggest sleep habit that you can get into that will help your sleep the most. If you go back to episode 105, you can find a lot more about sleep, but that is a huge one. If your sleep is all over the place and you are not prioritizing your sleep, that is going to make a huge difference in your stress. Other important things, socialization and building relationships and community. If you are trying to do it all on your own and you don't make the effort to hang out with people that make you better, make you feel good, that enhance your life, that energize you, and you're kind of just more of a loner, you're a little bit more lonely. Even if you're introverted, still, I would argue even more important, because I'm introverted as well. And when I don't make the effort to make plans with people and hang out with them, I start feeling really bad. It's not good for my stress levels at all. So that one's super important. Then you want to find a go-to stress management tool that you practice almost every single day, even on days that you're not stressed. So this could be something like going outside. The more time you spend outside, most likely the less stressed you're going to feel. Getting sunlight is hugely important for stress management, as well as just being in nature, even if it's not sunny out. So by far, my biggest stress management technique is to go for a walk. I leave my phone at home, not every walk, but sometimes I leave my phone at home and I bring my dogs and I just walk in nature. And I feel 10 times better almost every time when I get back. So that's a huge one. Other things that work well for people, gratitude, being grateful for things. You can't be grateful and anxious at the same time. So if you are thinking about or writing down or saying out loud the things you're grateful for, you're going to instantly feel better. It's going to put you in a better mind state. So that one's huge. I usually start the day with a little bit of that. I usually just think about it. I don't necessarily always write it down. Sometimes I do. If I'm feeling like extra not great in the morning, then I'll write things down. But usually just thinking about it helps start the day on a good note. Meditation for some people works really well. For other people, doesn't work great. So you can try meditation. You can try journaling. You can try breath work, mindfulness. One thing I recommend for a lot of people is to just allow yourself every single day to get bored for 10 minutes. You can sit, you can stand, you can walk around without any distractions, not talking to anyone, not looking at anything, just be bored. We have habitualized every single time we feel any urge of boredom. We always, because it's uncomfortable. It's not a comfortable feeling. It's kind of like hunger, except, more of a mental thing. Most people have habitualized at the slightest inkling of feeling bored, they find a way to get out of it. And it usually involves the phone, or it usually involves YouTube or Netflix or drinking or eating or whatever it may be. Allow yourself to get bored once in a while and you'll get much better at it. And you will habitualize being okay with getting bored and not wasting a bunch of dopamine on whatever you normally use to alleviate your boredom. So that one's huge. The important thing is, with all of these stress management techniques, you want to do them regularly, even on days you're not stressed. Think of it as a skill and a practice. The more often you do it, the more often you practice it, the better it's going to work when you really need it. So for example, meditation. If you only meditate when you're super stressed, you're just not going to be very good at meditation. It's going to be kind of pointless. I've started meditating recently and I do it pretty much every day, regardless of whether I'm stressed out or not. And on the days that I am stressed out, it works that much better because I do it almost daily. So I've gotten used to it. I've gotten better at it, and therefore it's more effective. So find something like that that'll allow you to manage your stress in stressful situations, but at the same time, make sure you're doing it regularly. Then the basic ones, be active, walk a lot, do some cardio. Being physically healthy will also improve your mental health. Exercise is a stress reliever to an extent. Obviously, this can be overdone, but a healthy relationship with exercise and doing something regularly, lifting weights, doing some cardio, walking, whatever you prefer, preferably all of those things, will absolutely help you in a big way. And you definitely want to limit alcohol as well, even though it's a temporary stress reliever. With alcohol, you're trading temporary relief for future more stress than you're feeling right now. So you get this like temporary calm down, you're kind of calm. And then in the future, either when you wake up the next day or whenever that alcohol wears off, your stress hormones are going to be higher. You're going to feel worse. Stimulants, you want to definitely be mindful of your stimulants. Caffeine is totally fine, but if you are basically living off it, your cortisol is going to be super high. You're going to feel stressed all the time. It's just kind of the nature of it. So being mindful of what you take in, even your diet. If you have a diet full of processed food, your body's kind of just going to be in a permanently inflamed state. And there's a significant correlation to your gut and your brain. So when your gut is inflamed because you're eating a bunch of food that is not real food, you are probably not going to feel very good. And you're probably not going to feel good physically, and you're likely not going to feel very good mentally. And a lot of people just eat like that all the time, so they don't know what is possible when they actually are more mindful and they eat better foods. But that is a huge one. So all those things can work, finding what's right for you. But the basics, sleep, not spending too much time on a constant dopamine drip, exercise, staying healthy physically, eating the right things, getting outside, getting sunlight, getting movement. Those are all the main ones. And then stress management techniques, you can kind of find whichever one works best for you, practice it all the time, and you should start feeling significantly better, because this is super important stuff. If you don't do any of this stuff, you're just going to feel anxious, worried, depressed, and stressed most of the time. And it's not favorable for recovery. It's not favorable for mental health. It's not favorable for doing things that are going to move you forward in life. It's not great for fulfillment and success. And being in a constantly stressed out state is just no fun and not beneficial. So hopefully some of those things can help you out. Next question, we'll make this the last one. Does biking long distances help with rucking? So while biking will help you improve your aerobic endurance, and it'll help you build aerobic capacity, and it won't make you worse at rucking specifically, it's not what I would consider to be something that's going to improve your rucking all that much, unless you are also doing a bunch of rucking and you do some biking supplementarily once in a while, or maybe once a week as a non-impact day or something like that. I talked about this a lot in my last episode, but specificity, the principle of specificity, to get good at any sort of athletic skill or endeavor, you have to practice doing that thing. Because even though rucking and biking are both cardiovascular exercises, they are skills. So if you did a ton of rucking and you hopped on a bike once and expected to be really good at biking because you do a lot of rucking, obviously you wouldn't be that great at biking. It would take you a little while because you'd have to get used to it. Your body would have to adapt to the skill and the differences between biking and rucking. And the opposite is also true. The best bikers in the world, they do a lot of biking, not really all that much else. The best runners in the world do a lot of running, not really all that much else. The best ruckers in the world do a lot of rucking, probably a lot of running too, because usually the best ruckers in the world are also in the military. So they have to be solid at both. And there's pretty good carryover between rucking and running. But it is specific. If you are training for selection, or if you're trying to prepare for something that involves a lot of rucking and you just bike, you do mostly biking and you hope for the best, it's not going to work out very well. The specific adaptations that you get from running and rucking are beyond just the cardiovascular adaptations. You also are getting your body accustomed to the impact. You're getting your soft tissues accustomed to the impact of every single step. Whereas biking, you're not getting any of that impact, which is great. It's an awesome thing to use as a non-impact substitution. It's great for if you just want to build general aerobic fitness and heart health and you like biking, then absolutely do all the biking you want. But like the guys who are winning the Tour de France, they didn't get there because they do a bunch of rucking and swimming and running. They get there because they do a lot of biking. The guys who are winning Boston Marathon, they're not doing a bunch of biking to get good at running. The guys who are smashing selection, soft selection that involves a ton of rucking, they're doing a lot of rucking and they're doing a lot of running. And that's what I would consider doing if you want to get really good at rucking, because it is that specific adaptation that you're looking for. So don't expect to be a ruck monster if you are a bike monster, but it is totally fine to do once in a while, so long as you are primarily doing a lot of rucking to improve that specific skill. So that's it, guys. That's the last question of the day. Didn't get to nearly all of them. I've been getting lots of questions lately, but I think those are some pretty solid ones to help you guys out with what you're looking for. And continue to ask. If I don't get to your question, if I haven't gotten to your question yet, please do continue to ask, and I will try my best to notice that. I do notice when guys ask repeat questions over and over. I always try to get to those, unless they're very low effort and not good questions. If it's been like 4 weeks and I haven't got to your question, then I would probably change the context a little bit or ask a slightly better question, but I'm doing my best. So thank you guys very much for listening. I'll be back for another episode soon. Until then, Terminator out.